Ahoy hoy! Welcome to the second installment of our telephone talk series from the Wellington County Museum and Archives. My name is Emily, and today we're going to be talking about the early history of telephones. We'll take a look at Alexander Graham Bell, and we'll highlight some of our early telephones that you can see in our exhibit, Talk to Me, featuring the collections of Wellington County resident Paul Axman. So, without further ado, let's just jump right on in. Alexander Bell was born on March 3, 1847 in Edinburgh, Scotland. He was the second of 3 boys. When he was born, his parents did not give him a middle name. He later adopted the middle name Graham in his teenage years. From an early age, Alec, as his family called him, was fascinated by inventing and the science of sound. Both his father and grandfather were speech teachers. His grandfather worked with patients who had speech problems such as stuttering, and his father created and studied what was known as a visible alphabet, which illustrated all of the sounds a human voice could make. His mother was also hard of hearing, and Alec would spend time learning to communicate with her through fingerspelling. He also found that if he spoke to her in a low voice very close to her forehead, his mother could hear him, as she could feel the vibrations of his speech. In any case, Alec grew up surrounded by people who were fascinated by sound. As a teenager, Alec's father, Melville, took him to meet Charles Wheatstone, a scientist from London who had reconstructed a speaking machine. During the visit, Wheatstone showed them a wooden box. On one side of the box was an accordion-like bag called a bellows, which acted like a pair of lungs. The other side of the box had levers and a leather tube that led to a vibrating reed. The reed made the box's voice, just like on saxophones and clarinets. When a stream of air hits a reed, the reed vibrates and creates sound. And when Wheatstone pushed on the bellows, sending air through the reed while squeezing the leather tube and working the levers, out came words. As a young man, Alec worked as a teacher for people with hearing impairments. But unfortunately, tragedy struck the family and both of Alec's brothers passed away from tuberculosis. His health was also very frail, and so his parents decided to move to Canada in 1870. The family settled in Brantford, and then in 1871, Alec moved to Boston. While in Boston, he continued to teach and experiment with sound. He became fascinated by a recent invention called the phenograph, which you can picture here, which records sound. He also began experimenting with sound and electrical currents through telegraphs. But what he desperately wanted to invent was something that he called a speaking telegraph, which we know today as the telephone. First things first, Bell needed an assistant. He needed to find somebody who could understand the mechanics of what it was that he was trying to create. And he found that man in Thomas Watson. Together they experimented and tested a whole bunch of different ideas until finally they found something that worked in the form of a liquid transmitter, which we have on display here. This is our replica liquid transmitter from Paul Axman that is on display in the Talk to Me exhibit. The liquid transmitter was the first telephone that could transmit speech. It works when someone speaks into the cone, which creates sound waves. The sound waves vibrate a piece called the membrane that is stretched at the bottom of the cone. The vibrations cause a needle to move in a cup of watered-down acid, which creates a flow of electricity. This electrical current travels to a receiver, which has a metal reed that vibrates and reproduces the speech sounds that were initially spoken into the cone. The first words to ever be spoken into a telephone were when Alexander Graham Bell said, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." Now there's a bit of a legend about what happened next. Mr. Watson wrote in his autobiography that when Bell said these words into the telephone, he sounded very alarmed. And so Mr. Watson ran down into Bell's room and found that he had accidentally spilt battery acid all over his clothes. Now, unfortunately, Bell had passed away by this point, so we can neither confirm nor deny that this actually happened. However, the liquid transmitter was never put into production, and it was never sold commercially. On the other hand, the box telephone was the first telephone to be used commercially in Canada. It was first used in 1877 with a call between Rideau Hall and the office of the Minister of Public Works. Throughout his life, Alexander Graham Bell continued to experiment with science and technology, and he also continued to teach people with hearing impairments. Alexander Graham Bell passed away on August 2nd, 1922, at the age of 75. A large gravestone marks his resting place and says simply, inventor, teacher. At the time of his burial, all telephone service in Canada and the United States stopped for 1 minute in honor of the inventor. Thank you so much for joining us for this installment of our Telephone Talk series from the Wellington County Museum and Archives. Stay tuned for our next installment about dial telephones. We'll see you next time.